The November blizzard struck the Montana Territory with the fury of an angry god, burying the landscape under 3 feet of snow and driving temperatures so low that even the hardiest cattle sought shelter in whatever windbreaks they could find. At his remote ranch 15 miles outside the town of Clearwater, Benjamin Ben Cartwright was securing his barn when he heard something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was the sound of crying, barely audible over the howling wind, but unmistakably human. Ben grabbed his lantern and stepped into the storm, following the sound toward his front gate. What he found there nearly broke his heart. A small figure huddled against the wooden fence post, covered in snow and shaking so violently from the cold that she could barely remain upright. It was a girl, no more than 12 years old, wearing nothing but a thin cotton dress that offered no protection against the brutal weather. "Sweet Lord," Ben muttered, rushing to the child and wrapping his heavy coat around her tiny frame. "How long have you been out here?" The girl looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. Her lips were blue from the cold, and she could barely speak through her chattering teeth. "Please, mister," she managed to whisper, "I need your help. People are going to die if somebody doesn't stop him." Ben lifted the girl in his arms, alarmed by how light she felt, and carried her toward his house. Inside, he set her down near the fireplace and began building up the fire while she huddled under every blanket he could find. "What's your name, child?" Ben asked gently, preparing hot coffee and soup from his evening meal. "Lucy," she replied, her voice still weak but growing stronger as warmth returned to her body. "Lucy Henderson. I walked here from the Clearwater orphanage, but it took me 2 days because I had to hide from the men who were chasing me." Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. The Clearwater orphanage was run by the town's mayor, Cornelius Blackwood, a man who had built his reputation on charity and community service. But Ben had always sensed something dark beneath Blackwood's public facade. "Why were men chasing you, Lucy?" Ben asked, sitting across from her with his own cup of coffee. Lucy pulled something from inside her dress, a folded piece of paper that she had clearly protected with her life. "Because of this," she said, holding out the document with trembling hands. "It's a letter that proves Mayor Blackwood isn't the good man everyone thinks he is." Ben accepted the paper carefully, noting how Lucy watched his face as he began to read. The letter was written in an educated hand, and as Ben absorbed its contents, his expression grew darker with each line. The letter was from Dr. Margaret Sullivan, the orphanage's former physician, addressed to the territorial governor in Helena. It detailed systematic abuse and neglect at the orphanage, but more damning still, it exposed Mayor Blackwood's scheme to sell older orphans to mining companies and railroad construction crews as unpaid laborers. According to Dr. Sullivan's account, children who reached their teenage years weren't placed with families as the public believed. Instead, they were transported to remote work sites where they labored in dangerous conditions with no pay and no hope of escape. Those who tried to run away or complained about their treatment simply disappeared. "Lucy, where did you get this letter?" Ben asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "Dr. Sullivan gave it to me before they killed her. She'd been asking too many questions about where the older kids were going, and Mayor Blackwood didn't like it. She told me to hide in the root cellar, and she gave me this letter to take to someone who could help." Ben felt his blood turn to ice. "They killed her," Lucy nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. 3 nights ago. They made it look like an accident, said she fell down the stairs. But I saw Mayor Blackwood's men leaving her room right before they found her body. She'd been asking questions about my friend Thomas, who disappeared last month when he turned 15. Ben studied the letter again, noting the official seal and detailed documentation. Dr. Sullivan had been thorough in her investigation, listing names, dates, and locations where children had been sent. She had also documented payments made to various officials who helped cover up the operation. "Lucy, why did you come to me?" Ben asked. "How did you even know where to find me?" Lucy looked up at him with eyes that held more courage than most adults possessed. "Dr. Sullivan told me about you. She said you were a man who fought in the war to free people who were being treated badly. and that you'd understand why this was important. She said you were the only person in the territory who wasn't afraid of Mayor Blackwood. Ben was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as memories of his service with the Union Army came flooding back. He had indeed fought to end slavery, and the idea that children were being enslaved right here in Montana territory filled him with the same righteous anger he'd felt during the war. Lucy, he said finally, this letter is going to destroy a lot of powerful people. Mayor Blackwood has friends in the territorial government, and they're not going to give up without a fight. If we do this, both of our lives could be in danger. Lucy sat up straighter, her young face set with determination. That reminded Ben of soldiers he'd known who were willing to die for their cause. Mr. Cartwright, there are still 23 kids at that orphanage who don't know what's really going to happen to them when they get older. Dr. Sullivan died trying to save them, and I'm not going to let her sacrifice be for nothing. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible Western stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Ben looked at this brave girl who had risked everything to expose the truth and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He had spent the years since the war trying to forget the responsibilities that came with fighting for justice, but some battles chose you whether you wanted them or not. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Ben Cartwright's ranch house, a different kind of storm was brewing, the kind that would either bring justice to the innocent or destroy everyone brave enough to stand against corruption. Lucy Henderson had delivered more than just a letter. She had delivered a call to action that Ben Cartwright could not ignore, even if it meant facing the most powerful man in the territory. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now to follow this epic Western adventure and discover the shocking depths of Mayor Blackwood's corruption. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Montana landscape, revealing a world transformed by the previous night's blizzard. Ben spent the early hours studying Dr. Sullivan's letter, while Lucy slept fitfully near the fireplace, occasionally crying out in her dreams as she relived the horrors she'd witnessed at the orphanage. The more Ben read, the more his anger grew. Dr. Sullivan had been meticulous in documenting not just the abuse of the children, but the network of corruption that enabled it. Mayor Blackwood wasn't working alone. His operation included Sheriff Watson, who ensured that runaway children were returned to the orphanage rather than helped to freedom, and Judge Morrison, who signed legal documents transferring custody of orphans to fictitious families that were actually mining companies and railroad contractors. The letter revealed that over the past 5 years, at least 47 children had been sold into what amounted to slavery. Most were sent to copper mines in the remote mountains where conditions were so dangerous that adult workers wouldn't stay. Others were shipped to railroad construction sites where they worked 16-hour days laying track through treacherous terrain. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. According to Dr. Sullivan's investigation, children who became sick or injured on these work sites weren't given medical care. They were simply disposed of and replaced with fresh workers. From the orphanage, Lucy stirred and sat up immediately, looking toward Ben with anxious eyes. "Did you read it all?" she asked quietly. Ben nodded grimly. "Lucy, this is worse than I imagined. According to Dr. Sullivan, your Mayor Blackwood has been selling children for years. She estimates that dozens have died in the mines and construction camps." Lucy pulled Ben's blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. Dr. Sullivan tried to protect us, but she was just one person against all of them." Ben stood and walked to his window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape while his mind worked through the implications. The corruption Dr. Sullivan had exposed reached into every level of local government. Traditional law enforcement was compromised, and going through official channels would only alert Blackwood that his operation had been discovered. "Lucy," he said, turning back to face her, "Dr. Sullivan mentions in her letter that she tried to contact the territorial governor. Do you know if she ever received a response?" Lucy shook her head. "She said she sent 3 letters to Helena, but never heard anything back. She thought maybe the letters were being stopped before they got there, or maybe the governor didn't believe her because she was just a woman making accusations against important men." Ben felt his jaw clench with frustration. The isolation of the Montana Territory worked in favor of men like Blackwood, who could operate with impunity as long as they maintained the appearance of respectability in their local communities. "There's something else," Lucy said hesitantly. "Something Dr. Sullivan told me that's not in the letter." Ben sat back down, giving the girl his full attention. "She said there's going to be another shipment of kids leaving the orphanage soon. 8 children, all between 13 and 16 years old. They're supposed to be transferred to a mining camp near Butte. But Dr. Sullivan found out they're really being sent to a place where nobody will ever find them." "When?" Ben asked, feeling urgency building in his chest. "Tomorrow night," Lucy replied. Mayor Blackwood told everyone the children were being adopted by families in California. But Dr. Sullivan heard him talking to the men who transport the kids. "They're not going to families. They're going to die in those mines." Ben stood up and began pacing, his military mind automatically shifting into planning mode. 8 children's lives hung in the balance, and he had less than 36 hours to figure out how to save them. While simultaneously exposing Blackwood's entire operation, Lucy watched him pace, her young face showing a wisdom far beyond her years. "Mr. Cartwright, what are we going to do?" Ben stopped pacing and looked at her. "We're going to save those children, Lucy. But first, we need to get this letter to someone who has the authority and integrity to act on it." "But who?" Lucy asked. Dr. Sullivan said all the local officials were either working for Mayor Blackwood or too scared to stand up to him. Ben smiled grimly. "Then we're going to have to go over their heads. There's a federal marshal named William Hayes who works out of Fort Benton. I served with him during the war, and he's one of the most honest men I've ever known. If anyone can be trusted with this information, it's Bill Hayes." Lucy's eyes brightened with hope. "But Fort Benton is over 100 miles from here. Can we get there in time to save the other children?" Ben was already moving toward his gun cabinet, checking his weapons and gathering supplies. "We're not going to Fort Benton, Lucy. Bill Hayes is going to come to us." Lucy looked confused. "How?" Ben pulled out a signal mirror and a bag of black powder. "Because I'm going to send him a message he can't ignore. Then we're going to intercept that wagon carrying those 8 children before it gets to the mining camp." Don't miss the next chapter of this epic Western adventure. Subscribe to our channel to follow this dangerous mission and discover whether Ben and Lucy can expose Mayor Blackwood before more innocent children disappear forever. As Ben began preparing for what would be the most dangerous mission of his life, he thought about Dr. Margaret Sullivan, a woman who had died trying to protect children she barely knew. Her sacrifice would not be in vain if he could help it. Lucy Henderson had brought him more than evidence of corruption. She had brought him the chance to honor the memory of a hero and save lives that hung in the balance. The letter that could destroy Mayor Blackwood was also the key to freeing children who had no one else to speak for them. Time was running out, but Ben Cartwright had faced worse odds during the war. This time, however, he wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting for the lives and futures of innocent children who deserved better than the fate Mayor Blackwood had planned for them. The moon was a thin sliver in the Montana sky as Ben and Lucy crouched behind a stand of pine trees, watching the road that led through Devil's Crossing. According to the information Lucy had gathered at the orphanage, Mayor Blackwood's men would be transporting 8 children through this remote mountain pass sometime after midnight, bound for the copper mine where so many others had disappeared. Ben had sent his signal to Marshal Hayes using a series of mirror flashes that spelled out an emergency code from their military days. If Hayes received the message and understood its urgency, federal help would be on the way. But the 8 children couldn't wait for reinforcements that might not arrive in time. The plan Ben had devised was risky but necessary. He would intercept the wagon at the narrowest point of the pass, where the road curved around a boulder field that provided natural cover. Lucy, despite her protests, would remain hidden with the horses while Ben confronted Blackwood's men directly. "There," Lucy whispered, pointing down the moonlit road. "I can see the wagon." Ben raised his field glasses and studied the approaching vehicle. It was a covered wagon drawn by 4 horses, with 2 armed riders flanking it on horseback. The drivers, appeared to be the same men Lucy had seen leaving Dr. Sullivan's room the night she was murdered. "Remember what I told you," Ben said quietly. "If things go badly, you take Dr. Sullivan's letter and ride straight to Fort Benton. Don't stop for anything or anyone." Lucy gripped his arm tightly. "Be careful, Mr. Cartwright. Those men killed Dr. Sullivan without thinking twice about it." Ben checked his weapons one final time and moved into position. The narrow pass would force the wagon to slow down, giving him the advantage of choosing when and where to make his move. As the wagon approached the boulder field, Ben stepped out into the road with his rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I'm United States Marshal Cartwright, and this wagon is under federal investigation." It wasn't entirely true yet, but Ben hoped the bluff would give him enough authority to stop the transport without bloodshed. The wagon driver pulled back on the reins, while the two outriders reached for their weapons. "You're making a mistake, Marshal," called out the lead rider, a scarred man whose voice Ben recognized from Lucy's description. "These children are being legally transferred to their new homes." Ben kept his rifle trained on the group while moving closer to the wagon. "Then you won't mind if I inspect the transfer documents and speak with the children." What he saw when he looked into the back of the wagon made his blood boil. 8 children, ranging in age from 13 to 16, were huddled together like frightened animals. They were bound with ropes and had gags tied around their mouths to prevent them from crying out. Their eyes showed the terror of people who knew they were being taken to their deaths. "These children are bound and gagged," Ben observed, his voice deadly calm. "That doesn't look like a legal adoption transfer to me." The lead rider made his decision and went for his gun. But Ben was ready for him. The rifle shot echoed through the canyon as the man toppled from his horse. His partner tried to wheel his mount around to flee, but found himself facing Lucy Henderson, who had disobeyed Ben's orders and positioned herself to block the road behind the wagon. "You're not going anywhere," Lucy called out, holding one of Ben's spare pistols with surprising steadiness for a 12-year-old girl. The second rider raised his hands in surrender while the wagon driver sat frozen with shock. Ben quickly moved to free the children, cutting their bonds and removing their gags while reassuring them that help had finally arrived. The oldest of the rescued children, a boy named David who was about 16, helped the others down from the wagon. "Are you really a marshal?" he asked Ben. Ben hesitated for a moment, then decided honesty was the best policy. "Not yet, son. But I will be soon, and I'm here to make sure you and these other children get home safe." Lucy approached the group, and several of the children recognized her immediately. "Lucy," exclaimed a girl named Sarah, "we thought you were dead. Mayor Blackwood said you ran away and froze in the storm. I made it to Mr. Cartwright's ranch." Lucy replied, "He's going to help us stop Mayor Blackwood and save the other kids still at the orphanage." The wagon driver, realizing his situation was hopeless, began talking in hopes of saving himself. "Look, Marshal, I was just following orders. Mayor Blackwood said these kids were going to good homes where they'd learn honest work." Ben studied the man's face, seeing the fear and desperation there. "What's your name?" "Tom Mitchell," the man replied. "I've got a family of my own, Marshal. I needed the work." Ben made a decision that would prove crucial to exposing the entire conspiracy. "Tom, you're going to help me put Mayor Blackwood in prison, or you're going to join him there. What's it going to be?" Mitchell looked at the 8 rescued children, then at Lucy's determined face, and made his choice. "I'll tell you everything I know, Marshal. Mayor Blackwood's been running this operation for years, and I can prove it." 3 hours later, Marshal William Hayes arrived with a detachment of federal deputies, having ridden hard through the night after receiving Ben's signal. The sight of 8 rescued children and a wagon full of evidence was enough to convince him that Ben's emergency call had been justified. "Bill," Ben said, greeting his old friend with relief, "we've got enough evidence here to bring down the biggest corruption scandal in Montana Territory history." Hayes examined Dr. Sullivan's letter and listened to Tom Mitchell's confession with growing amazement. "Ben," he said finally, "what you've uncovered here goes beyond local corruption. This connects to a network of illegal labor operations across multiple territories. The trials that followed exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond Clearwater. Mayor Blackwood's operation was part of a larger network that had been exploiting orphaned and abandoned children throughout the Western Territories. Federal investigations led to dozens of arrests and the liberation of hundreds of children from similar situations. Subscribe now to our channel for more epic Western stories that celebrate the triumph of good over evil. Lucy Henderson became a key witness in the prosecutions, her courage inspiring other children to come forward with their own stories of abuse. Ben Cartwright was officially appointed as a federal marshal and spent the next several years tracking down and dismantling similar operations throughout the West. The Clearwater orphanage was closed permanently, and the surviving children were placed with carefully screened families who genuinely wanted to provide loving homes. Lucy herself was adopted by Ben, who discovered that saving her life had also saved his own soul. Dr. Margaret Sullivan was posthumously honored as a hero, whose sacrifice had exposed one of the territory's darkest secrets. A school was built in Clearwater bearing her name, ensuring that her dedication to protecting children would never be forgotten. The letter that Lucy had carried through a blizzard became evidence in the largest child welfare reform movement in Western history. It proved that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths, and that courage can come from the most unexpected places. This Western story reminds us that real heroes often wear no badges and seek no glory, but simply do what is right when faced with unconscionable evil. Controls Duchat Sonnet 4.